So what, in a sense, you're saying is that there are certain situations where the president can decide that it's in the best interest of the nation or something and do something illegal.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
And that was President Nixon speaking to David Frost in 1977. Today, the Supreme Court came to a similar conclusion regarding immunity for former President Trump. What the bombshell decision means, I'm Gadi Schwartz, and this is Stay Tuned Now. It's looking like a week of wins for former President Trump, first with that debate performance, and then today with a very critical Supreme Court ruling that just came out. We heard President Biden just a few minutes ago address the nation on that very ruling, saying it goes against what the founding fathers intended.
This nation was founded on the principle that there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law. No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. Today's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, that fundamentally changed for all practical purposes.
Now getting to the specifics on that ruling, the Supreme Court ruling today that the president is absolutely immune from criminal prosecution for anything he did in his official capacity as president. As for what's official and what's unofficial, that's going to be up to a lower court to figure out. And this ruling is all in regard to the case brought forward by special counsel Jack Smith in Washington over what happened in the days around January 6th. A lot of the case hinged on what Trump now has absolute immunity from. For example, his correspondence with the Justice Department or his conversations with Vice President Mike Pence, those are part of the official office as president, so immunity. Posting stuff online, that is still a big question mark. And as you might imagine, the justices voted along ideological lines, with Justices Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson dissenting. Justice Sotomayor also blasting the majority decision, saying it reshapes the institution of the presidency. Trump, on the other hand, is calling it a big win for our Constitution and democracy, going so far as to say that all criminal cases should be dropped against him in light of this ruling. Let's go to NBC News correspondent, NBC News Now anchor Hallie Jackson. Hallie, I mean, talk to us first off. A lot of people were watching this to see the response from President Biden. Can you tell us about the optics of the speech here? And there's reporting that, that they wanted him to be more visible today, right?
I think people might have been tuning in here, Gadi, just speaking plainly, to see how President Biden looked after that debate performance on Thursday night that's widely been panned as disastrous, including by Democrats. He held that rally in North Carolina Friday where he was quite energetic, clearly seeking to turn the page, and then this was the first time we've seen him since then. So let me take this in a couple of buckets here, and let me start with his reaction to the Supreme Court decision, this critical ruling now by the court that is consequential, not just for the reasons you have laid out for this immediate case in front of us here, the federal election interference indictment against former President Trump, but bigger picture, broadly speaking, for future presidents, maybe for generations to come. Those are no less than the stakes that we're talking about here. And President Biden alluded to that, talking about how the role of the president, in his view, has been changed forever, suggesting that this court is saying there's virtually no limits on what a president can do, that this is a dangerous precedent, and that this nation is founded on principles that there are no kings in America, but agreeing with the dissent from Justice Sotomayor that, in fact, this does make the president, in effect, a king in this country, able to determine what he can or cannot do. That's the view from the White House. That's the view that the president laid out. And he's talking about how it's the American people. If it's not going to be the court that will render a judgment, if it won't be a trial that will render a judgment on former President Trump, it will be the American public come November. That is familiar language because that is central to the case that President Biden has been making against former President Trump for months now, ever since this campaign began. As for the second bucket, the optics of it, if you will, obviously this is coming on the heels of those pretty intense 90 minutes for President Biden, a debate performance that has now set off shockwaves inside the Democratic Party, spiked anxiety, and has his campaign now scrambling to try to contain some of the fallout and do some damage control, including with a call tonight with some donors seeking to reassure them, to say that President Biden is not going anywhere. That's on the heels of a different call just yesterday with a top campaign official who took the extraordinary step of explaining to donors the sort of messy logistics, the difficulty if, in fact, President Biden were to come off the ticket. The fact that that is even a conversation to be had is, I think, an indication of this extraordinary moment here, Gadi. And President Biden tonight had the opportunity to take some questions. We really haven't seen him off a teleprompter since that debate happened. Right. Didn't see that tonight. We did see him speak publicly. We'll see what happens in the days to come.
Yeah, Hallie, and speaking of that first bucket that you brought up, I mean, sure. We heard that speech, this kind of campaign speech, that idea that, hey, there's a decision to be made by the voters, but it seems like that's hyperbole, right? Because in front of the voters, it's Biden or Trump, not the Supreme Court as it stands right now. Can you take us through, like, what the practical application is if Biden does win or if Trump does win with this ruling standing?
Sure. So let's take it what happens if former President Trump were to win the White House come November. This case goes away. That's the practical impact, right? Mm-hmm. It goes poof, it's done, it's over. And that is what President Biden is talking about when he says that it's the American people who will render a judgment here. Because while it will not be, a court of the former president's peers, like we saw in that state New York hush money case, it will, in the eyes of Democrats, in the eyes of the Biden campaign, be these voters in these half a dozen battleground states, the states are going to be critical come November, who will make that decision. Now, if President Biden does win re-election, then presumably these cases would continue. They would move forward, but under the constraints that the Supreme Court has put on the prosecutor, Jack Smith, as you so capably laid out, Gadi, laying out what evidence can and cannot be brought based on were these acts official, these alleged crimes, were they done in his official capacity or in the former president's unofficial capacity as a private citizen. Bottom line, it's going to take some time, and that is why this is seen as a political win at minimum for former President Trump, because this virtually assures that this trial, this verdict will not happen before Election Day.
Yeah, it's going to be very confusing to figure out what is official and unofficial, especially when it comes to posting on social media. Founding fathers, obviously, I can't even imagine what it would be like to try to explain that to one of the founding fathers of this nation. Uncharted territory is exactly where we're headed, and we're hearing things like House Representative AOC looking to file impeachment articles, possibly against the Supreme Court. Like, how does that work?
It probably won't, just to be totally honest with you, but I do think it signals the deep dissatisfaction that some Democrats have, not just with this ruling, Gadi, but more broadly with the way that the court is operating in the first place. You had Nancy Pelosi, as we talked about a couple of minutes ago, saying that she believes this court has gone rogue, in her words. That's coming from the former Democratic House Speaker. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, says she plans to bring articles of impeachment when Congress gets back into session, or is considering that, presumably against some of the justices who ruled in favor of former President Trump. Let's be real about that. The House is run by Republicans. That's going nowhere, right? Like, that doesn't really have teeth in the political reality in which this planet Earth exists at the moment, but it would be symbolic, right? And I think it is illustrative of the frustration that some Democrats feel more broadly with the court as a whole. That's on the backdrop, Gadi, just to get a little bit macro with you here. And we don't have polling, obviously, based on today's ruling, but we've seen it consistently over the course of the last couple of years, ever since the court overturned Roe versus Wade. They are near record lows as far as their approval rating with the American public. There is an erosion of public trust in the Supreme Court as an institution more broadly and more generally, Gadi.
Hallie Jackson, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you. No one levels with us like you do. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks, Fred.
Now let's bring in NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian for more on some of the context here. Break this down. What is this ruling saying? What kind of immunity is being given to the president, and what's this whole official, unofficial business? Is there anything that is delineated here?
You know, fundamentally, Gadi, we don't know the limits of this ruling. That's what's so perplexing about it. You know, during oral arguments, both sides agreed that there was some level of immunity, although the lawyer for the special counsel didn't call it immunity, for the president and his Article 2 powers, his core powers. And both sides also agreed that there were some things that presidents can do that are private acts that aren't immune. And Donald Trump's lawyers even agreed that some of the Jack Smith indictment included private acts that can be prosecuted. So there was a zone of agreement there, and the Supreme Court seized on that. It was clear that the conservative justices were very uncomfortable with the idea that a president could be prosecuted, say, for a drone strike on an American citizen, which is something that actually happened with Barack Obama, and and some people thought that it was against the law. And the idea that some prosecutor could come back and indict Barack Obama for a drone strike on an American citizen, that struck the conservative justices as something that should never happen. But we're dealing with an entirely different situation here with the acts alleged with Donald Trump, and you can go back to the acts alleged against Richard Nixon and Watergate. And so this decision does not really explain where official acts end and private acts begin. You know, it makes pretty clear that there are some things that are clearly private acts, like when Donald Trump and his allies were calling state officials and lobbying them and saying that there was fraud when, in fact, there was not fraud. That is pretty much, they're pretty confident that those are private acts. And on the other end of the spectrum, as you mentioned earlier, they said that any conversations with the Attorney General about getting the Justice Department to do something, which is part of the indictment, those they said were absolutely official acts, so they struck that from the indictment. And then there's stuff that's in the middle. For example, public statements of the president. They said there's a presumption that those are official acts, but that really has to be litigated. The prosecutors may be able to go into court and convince a judge that in certain cases, certain statements are actually private acts. But one odd thing they said is you can't look at the motive. And that seems to a lot of legal scholars to be fundamentally problematic, because what the allegations in the indictment are that the motive for Donald Trump was a corrupt motive to stay in power. Just as with Richard Nixon, it was a corrupt motive to cover up the Watergate burglary and order the CIA to say that to stop the FBI investigation. But if you can't look at the motive, there's a question about how you prove that an official act was actually a private act for private gain. And none of this is spelled out in the opinion. What they've said is it has to go back down to the district judge. She's going to have a hearing, maybe multiple hearings on this, and that's going to be interesting because a lot of the evidence in this case is going to become public, much more than that is in the indictment right now. And then she's going to have to render a decision, which of course will be appealed to the circuit court and probably ultimately the Supreme Court, which is why this case can't possibly go to trial before November. And there's some question actually as to whether this case can survive. It really depends on how all this gets interpreted, Gadi.
What about the other cases? I mean, immunity has been a cornerstone of almost every case that Trump is facing right now. How is this going to impact those cases?
So that's a great question. Immunity has not yet been raised in, for example, the classified documents case in Florida. Almost every other defense under the sun has, and the judge has entertained that. But they haven't made the immunity argument. But I've heard some talk today that the Justice Department believes that is coming. Because, for example, will Donald Trump argue that to the extent that those documents were transferred, those classified documents were transferred from the White House to Mar-a-Lago while Donald Trump was president, he may make the argument that, look, that was an official act. I was taking my presidential records, and everything else that happened afterwards, including the allegations of obstruction of justice, of ordering aides to destroy evidence, that's all moot because it began with an official act. I think you can expect Trump to make that argument. Whether it will survive, whether Judge Eileen Cannon will agree with that is another matter, but it's certainly another complication, making it really difficult. So Jack Smith here has brought two very forceful criminal indictments against Donald Trump, both of which appear to be in jeopardy.
Ken Delanian, thank you. Well, turning now to NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas, who is also joining us. Danny, Justice Sotomayor, in her dissent, said, in every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. It's something that we saw echoed by the president there. So how far does this ruling go? And what do we mean by the word absolute immunity here?
Absolute means absolute. If it's involving a core presidential function, and that is a small list. That's veto power, appointment power, probably commanding troops in the field, but not declaring war because that's more Congress. But you get the idea. There's a short list of core executive functions for which there is absolute immunity. Beyond that, anything that is arguably official or maybe that shares power with Congress and the executive branch, there is still a presumption of immunity. So really, the thorniest issue is not absolute immunity for those core presidential functions. It's really the presumption of immunity that attaches to that gray area, because that means when Donald Trump goes back to the district court before Judge Chutkan, he gets the presumption of winning. It's the burden placed on the government to prove that his conduct was not official and therefore not entitled to immunity. You can focus on the absolute immunity because it sounds so stark of such moment. However, it is that presumption that may be the most important word, not the word absolute, but the presumption attached to everything in the gray area.
So we don't want to be distracted by the absolute or the official or the unofficial. It is the presumptive. And the presumption, if I understand the way that you're describing it, it's basically like, hey, from here on out, we're just going to err on the side of like, he was probably working in an official capacity. Is that what they're telling the lower courts here?
Yes. And in addition, the court has said that you cannot look at motive, which implies that even something that outwardly appears to have an evil motive or a selfish motive or a purely private motive, as long as it's official conduct, if you're not looking at the motive and you say, you know, you take a step back and say, well, that's the president talking to members of the DOJ about investigating potential crime. Well, then it sounds like it's either absolute immunity or a presumption of immunity. Either way, all good for an ex-president. They get the benefit of the doubt.
Huh. Now, Daddy, here's a question I was just thinking about. Okay, so let's say, hypothetically, Trump wins. And we've heard Trump go after Biden many times. And we've heard Trump call Biden a criminal and point to very specific instances where he's like, well, he should be, prosecuted, and this is criminal and that's criminal. If Trump is elected, does Biden get this same type of immunity for something like what we heard in the debates on the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan?
Yes, exactly. I mean, and in a sense, look, we've been operating on this kind of immunity, although the justices would disagree. That some of the justices say that every president has viewed himself as subject to prosecution after he leaves office. But at the same time, we've never done it before. So maybe there was kind of an air of immunity, even if it wasn't actual immunity. But what you bring up is absolutely true. Let me give you another hypothetical I'm not hearing anyone mention. It's fascinating to me. Imagine Judge Bannon down in Florida dismisses the entire case against Donald Trump. And then if and when Donald Trump gets elected, he decides, when there's a Supreme Court vacancy, who do I think would make a great Supreme Court justice? Hey, Judge Bannon, they high-five at her swearing in and are freely admitting that, hey, one good turn deserves another. That's a core executive function, the appointment power. Donald Trump would be in the clear.
I really hope you don't have a crystal ball there that you're just looking down at there. Danny Savalos, I thank you so much. This has been a wild day, and I can't appreciate your analysis enough. Thanks. And shifting now to other big stories today, Hurricane Beryl is an extremely dangerous and record-breaking Category 4 storm that is hurtling through the Caribbean after making landfall in the Grenadines earlier this morning. Now, this is the first Category 4 hurricane that we have seen spin up in June, and it is packing a huge punch, bringing winds of up to 150 miles an hour and life-threatening storm surge to the Windward Islands. Just look at the force of this ocean water. So intense, it is sinking boats in Barbados. People there are saying they have never seen storm surge like this.
Look at the sea water flowing down the main road. Look, it came into the road. Oh, all the chill bars, chairs gone. Oh, that was a bad wave just now, boy. Jesus Christ.
Our team is tracking Beryl tonight. Bill Cairns will have that forecast. But first, NBC's Sam Brock takes a look at Beryl's force as it makes landfall this morning. Sam?
Tonight, Hurricane Beryl, the earliest recorded Category 4 to hit the Atlantic, is battering the southeastern Caribbean, puncturing schools in the Grenadines and slamming the coast with wave after wave of damage and debris. Similar snapshots are pouring in from places like Grenada and the island of Carriacou, where the National Hurricane Center says Beryl made landfall as an extremely dangerous system, producing catastrophic winds and life-threatening storm surge. Grenada's prime minister offering a sobering assessment and warning.
We have reports of extensive storm surge. We have reports of extensive loss of roof and damage to buildings. There is the likelihood of even greater damage.
As palm trees bend and storm surge floods communities across the Caribbean, making large boats bob up and down in Barbados, an even more jaw-dropping vantage point from space. The International Space Station revealing Beryl's monstrous footprint, as hurricane hunters offer an eerie glimpse from inside the eye of a system sustaining 150-mile-an-hour winds. White-knuckle moments for residents still in harm's way, from Union Island and Martinique to Carriacou.
Those are the areas that are most threatened now with both those devastating Category 4 winds as well as the storm surge of 6 to 9 feet above normal tide levels.
Meteorologists now keeping a close eye on countries like Jamaica, currently under a hurricane watch, as nearby Turks and Caicos issues this urgent warning to students. In the interest of their health and safety, the country is organizing a charter to bring them home before Beryl strikes. The scary situation to our south coming as Americans have been dealing with significant but far less serious cycles of severe weather. Tonight, more than 4,000 delays at airports nationwide on the heels of Sunday's 9,000 and thousands more cancellations, creating chaos.
And Sam joins us now. And Sam, just looking at this thing, it is a monster. Do we have any sense of what conditions are like right now in Grenada?
Sure, it's monstrous. We know it's really bad, Gadi. The problem is that the communication networks have been compromised. So we're getting sort of a smattering of updates from island officials, but it's hard to put all the pieces together right now. You heard in our story a second ago from the Prime Minister of Grenada. What he went on to say was that he believes that the island of Carriacou is flattened within about 30 minutes of hurricane activity. He also suspects that the neighboring island of Petite Martinique suffered, in his words, extreme damage. He said as soon as he is able to visit those islands and it's safe to do so, he's going to assess just how bad it is. But we're waiting on that. While at the same time, officials from Jamaica earlier today said they're expecting Beryl to come right through the southern part of the island, that it could be vulnerable to extreme flooding. And they are warning residents there that a lot of those safety vehicles, whether it's aircraft or boats or police vehicles, are going to have to be secured for safety purposes, and that they're not going to be able to rescue people. So be aware of that in Jamaica as this thing continues its eastward march. And lastly, Gadi, I will leave you with this. It only took 42 hours for Beryl to basically go from a tropical depression to a major hurricane. That has only happened 6 times in the history of the Atlantic basin for hurricanes. It portends very poorly for what is expected to be an extremely active season with these water temperatures just so warm, historically warm, in the weeks to come. Gadi, back to you.
Yeah, terrifying. Hopefully this is just a one-off. Sam, thank you. And let's bring in NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns. Bill, you expected this storm to become a hurricane when we last chatted on Friday, I think. But did you expect to see what we're seeing today?
No. No one thought it would be like virtually almost a Category 5, Gadi. I mean, that was pretty wild. And the thing that we have to remember, going into this hurricane season, everyone was saying it's going to be an active season. We're going to have a lot of big storms. We're going to have a bunch of major storms. And that's because the ocean temperatures are so warm. They're much warmer than they should be. Last year was the warmest temperature we ever recorded on Earth. The first 6 months of this year is even warmer than last year. So it shouldn't be a big surprise that when we have a storm like this one, over 82, 83, 84-degree water, it's going to get strong and big, especially if the upper level winds are favorable, which they were, which is why it became such a beast of a storm over the last 2 to 3 days. And it still looks like a big buzzsaw here, very circular, very powerful. Thankfully, it's not going to affect any land areas from the next 48 hours. And the Hurricane Center does think it's going to start getting a little bit weaker. The wind shear is going to start slicing it in half a little bit. Maybe not in time for Jamaica, but for areas hopefully around Cancun and Belize. By then, it should be a tropical storm or only a Category 1. I say only, but by their standards, they can deal with that. Jamaica and the northern coast of Haiti, that's the next obstacles that it'll be close to as a Category 3 or a Category 2. And as far as the Bahamas and Florida go, you look fairly safe. All of our computer models are south here of Cuba, near Jamaica, and then possibly Cancun down here towards Belize. It does, Gadi, get into the Gulf of Mexico, but by then it's expected to only be a tropical storm, and we'll have to wait and see if it affects South Texas about 5 to 6 days from now.
Yeah, we'll keep our fingers crossed. Meanwhile, shifting to the United States, I mean, this is going to be an extremely busy week for travel, right? Could we be seeing severe weather get in the way of that?
Yeah, it's summertime, so we're going to get some severe, but it shouldn't be hugely widespread. So I think the delays and cancellations for the flights will be more scattered or isolated at best. As we go through Tuesday, Kansas City area, southern portions of Iowa, this is going to be the travel difficulty spot. Some very strong thunderstorms and flash flooding is going to be a possibility. And then by the time we get into Wednesday, we're going to take these storms and shift them into the Ohio Valley. So areas like Indianapolis, Columbus, Louisville, Lexington, that area could have some scattered storms to deal with. So by the time we get to the travel forecast for Wednesday and Thursday. Wednesday is really not that bad of a day. It's really just Chicago, St. Louis. East Coast, you look good. These are typical storms down along the Florida and the Gulf Coast. West Coast, unbelievably hot. It's going to be one of the hottest 4th of Julys ever for interior sections of the West. But at least travel-wise, you'll be okay. And then on 4th of July, Gadi, just the St. Louis airport, that's the only one I'm really concerned with some significant thunderstorms late in the day. Obviously, that could delay the fireworks shows, too. But I know in the West, record highs. Some of these temperatures I'm seeing, Gadi, for interior California areas like Redding. I know Palm Springs could be up to 121 by Friday. It's just, yeah, it's going to be brutal.
Yeah, we'll be barbecuing way late into the night.
Yeah.
Bill Cairns, thank you. And in Massachusetts, a big mistrial grabbing headlines. A jury deadlocked on whether to convict a woman for the murder of her police officer boyfriend. And prosecutors there say they are pushing for a retrial. NBC's Aaron McLaughlin has the details.
Tonight, Karen Reed walking out of court after a jury was unable to reach a verdict in her tumultuous trial.
I'm declaring a mistrial.
Tonight, Karen Reed walking out of court after a jury was unable to reach a verdict in her tumultuous trial.
I'm declaring a mistrial in this case.
Following 5 days of deliberations, the jury of 6 men and 6 women deadlocked over whether to find Reed guilty of murdering her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe. The judge reading this note from the jurors.
Some members of the jury firmly believe that the evidence surpasses the burden of proof. Others find the evidence fails to meet this standard.
O'Keefe's mother was visibly upset, Reed embracing her family, her lawyers vowing not to back down.
No matter how long it takes, no matter how long they keep trying, we will not stop fighting.
It's the culmination of an extremely complex trial that included 74 witnesses, hundreds of exhibits, and allegations of a police cover-up, captivating watchers on social media and outside the court. Prosecutors allege following relationship issues and a night of heavy drinking, Reed backed her SUV into O'Keefe, leaving him to die in the snow outside the home of a fellow police officer. Arguing the constellation of the facts point to Reed, including pieces of a broken taillight recovered in the snow.
I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. Those are the words of the defendant.
The defense pointed to a botched investigation, arguing Reed was being framed for murder by police.
Conflicts of interest? Doesn't matter. Just look the other way.
Prosecutors say those allegations are untrue, and tonight they're vowing to retry the case. Back to you.
Aaron McLaughlin, thank you. And don't go anywhere. We are just getting started. Up next, a community in New York is on edge tonight after a deadly police-involved shooting of a 13-year-old boy. We're going to have the latest on that investigation. Plus, new technology to take a bite out of shark attacks. NBC's Brian Chung tells us all about this amazing advancement that actually creates this force field to keep sharks away from swimmers. That's in tonight's Future of Everything. And a little later this hour, we're going to introduce you to one extraordinary man who has turned his beach discoveries into a museum of lost treasures. That's all coming up ahead, so stay tuned. It is very rare for a single human to find one message in a bottle. You found dozens of messages in a bottle.
There's a lot of history and there's a story in everything.
Hey, welcome back. And what a key Trump ally had to say today before heading to prison is coming up next. But first, here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. A Georgia family has been killed in a small plane crash in upstate New York. Now, this happened yesterday afternoon just west of Albany. The family was heading home from a Little League baseball tournament. All 5 people on board were killed, and the youngest was 10 years old. That crash is now under investigation. And the DOJ is set to seek a guilty plea from Boeing for misleading a federal regulator in the development of their 737 MAX planes. Now, the charge stems from the 2018 crashes that killed 346 people total. The feds were investigating possible violations of a 2021 settlement that protected Boeing from federal charges, and a source tells NBC News that Boeing has been offered a plea deal that includes a guilty plea, more than a $240 million fine, and 3 years of outside oversight. It's not clear if Boeing is going to accept those terms, and lawyers for the victims' families have blasted that reported deal. And from top the mountain to sail block, the owners of the Boston Celtics say they are planning on selling the historic NBA franchise. The team was valued by Forbes last year at over $4.7 billion. That sale is expected to happen at some point later this year or early next year. And Boston just took home a league record 18th championship just a few weeks ago. And we've learned that Charlotte the Stingray has died. You probably remember when she went viral for becoming pregnant earlier this year, despite having no males in her tank. Well, the staff at her North Carolina aquarium confirmed the sad news last night. And Charlotte never actually gave birth to any stingray pups. In May, the aquarium revealed she developed a rare reproductive disease and was receiving treatment. And Quincy Wilson, he is now the youngest male track athlete to ever make the U.S. Olympic team. Remember his name. He's going to be huge. The 16-year-old broke an under-18 world record at the trials last week. He has been picked up to run in the 4x400-meter relay event. The Maryland native broke the news himself on social media. And tonight, a top Donald Trump ally, Steve Bannon, is behind bars serving 4 months in a federal prison for contempt of Congress. Now, this all goes back to him refusing a subpoena from lawmakers investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And right before he surrendered, Bannon remained defiant.
I have not only no regrets, I'm actually proud of what I did, and I felt terrible if I didn't do it. Yes. I don't mind going to prison today.
And for more, let's bring in NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, who sat down with the former White House chief strategist this weekend. Vaughn, what can you tell us?
Hey, Gadi, look, Steve Bannon left the White House in the very first year of Donald Trump's administration as the chief strategist. He went back to creating this podcast called War Room that is simulcast online and on air. And since then, this podcast has really rapidly increased in its influence and the extent to which it is heard and really used as a major vehicle for the MAGA movement today, which is really the most fervent base of support behind Donald Trump today. And so Steve Bannon, he's going away for these 4 months to prison. He's going to be released, he tells me, literally the week before the election. But he said that this is a movement that goes beyond November's election. At the same time, the reason he went to prison is because he refused to comply with a subpoena, a congressional subpoena that was given to him to provide testimony as well as documents to the January 6th Select Committee back in 2022. He defied that order. And part of this is the fact that he had, just as one example, 2 phone conversations with Donald Trump on January 5th, 2021, and then 2 phone conversations with him on January 6th, including the morning before the attack. I want to let you listen to me ask him about those conversations. What were you talking about with him on those phone calls?
They were personal and private conversations
What about
that
on January 6th?
he's exerted executive privilege on.
You were not in the White House. You were not serving in an official capacity in the White House. Executive privilege.
No, but I was the
hang on. On January 5th, 6th, you talked to him that morning.
That's all to be
as well as that night. What did you talk to President Trump about?
Hang on. That's all to be ascertained by the Supreme Court.
Now, Bannon there not answering exactly what the contents of those conversations were. And by refusing to do so, he is now serving out this 4-month prison term. And the 2 men, Donald Trump and Steve Bannon, they had talked just this last month over the phone. Steve Bannon was one time on air when Trump called him directly here. And Donald Trump posted this morning that he should be freed. Of course, there's a lot on the line in this election, and Steve Bannon has suggested that if Donald Trump were to get back in office, that he would help try to press from the outside the efforts of the Trump administration, at least through that media ecosystem that he has helped, by and large, create. Gadi?
Vaughn Hilliard, thank you so much. And coming up, kidfluencers are getting some legal protection in Illinois. We're going to tell you about this new law that makes sure these kid stars get their checks. But first, you got to see this. They come in peace. A deputy in Missouri pulled over 2 people driving a makeshift UFO car on their way to none other than Roswell, New Mexico for a festival. The officer warned them about their speed and their registration, even though they probably could have made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. Only towards New Mexico, right? We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back. And here are some of the stories happening out west that we're following right now. In Salt Lake City, a tragic rafting accident has killed a veteran of the city's fire department. Michael Harp fell from his raft on the Green River in Dinosaur National Monument and was found 10 miles downstream the next morning. Harp was a 27-year veteran of the fire department in Salt Lake City and a responder on 9/11. And a new California law requires bars and clubs to offer drug testing devices to protect against date rape drugs. Now, that bill mandates that 2,400 bars and clubs need to provide these tests for free or at a minimal cost to customers. Venues must also post signs that tell people that those tests are available. And in Alaska's Denali National Park, a half-square-mile wildfire shut down the park's entrance. And firefighters were dropping water on the Riley fire from aircraft to try to contain it. Park employees were evacuated to a nearby town, and this is just one of more than 100 wildfires in Alaska that are burning right now. And in New York, crowds gathered outside an upstate city hall to protest the deadly shooting of a teenager. The family of a 13-year-old are calling for accountability after Utica police shot the boy on Friday night. Body cam footage released Saturday shows officers approaching the teen, and police say they tackled him to the ground after he ran from them and opened fire when he allegedly pointed a replica handgun at them. NBC's Emily Akeda has that story.
New video of a gut-wrenching police shooting that killed a 13-year-old boy tonight, prompting growing demands for answers and accountability. Family of Nimue, who graduated 8th grade just last week, joined protesters outside of Utica, New York City Hall.
I can't accept the fact that he's gone from our family.
On Friday night, Utica police officers approached Mue and another young person who they say matched a suspect description for a recent robbery.
I just pat you down and make sure you got no weapons on you.
Body camera video shows that's when the teen took off. Police pausing and highlighting the video where they say Mue pointed what looked like a handgun at officers. Later learning it was a replica Glock pellet gun. Police tackled Mue and seconds later fired a shot. A use of force protesters say went too far. Mue's family is part of Utica's robust refugee population, members of the Karen, an ethnic group from Myanmar.
Our parents, they fled war, they fled persecution. We are the future. This is our home. We're not running away.
Utica's mayor now urging patience.
People want justice, but they don't want to see due process. We have to see the process play out.
The state attorney general's office and Utica police are both investigating with the goal, they say, of being fair, thorough, and impartial. The officers involved have been placed on administrative paid leave. Gadi.
Emily, thank you. And influencers, they can bring in some pretty big cash these days. But what happens when those influencers are little kids? Well, in Illinois, a new law has just gone into effect today that aims to protect kidfluencers, online content creators who aren't legally adults but still have the ability to generate a whole lot of income for their families. And now they must be paid at least a portion of the earnings from videos they appear in. And if their parents don't set aside the money, they could face legal action. Joining us now is NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa. Maggie, okay, so the first question I have is how is this law enforced? I mean, is it the kids calling up the state and being like, my mom's not paying me? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, enforcement is an interesting word because it might not be how people think. Basically, what this does is it gives the kids grounds to sue their parents when the kid turns 18, becomes an adult, and then thinks to themselves, mom and dad made a lot of money off of their social media content. I was in a lot of that, and I never saw a dime. So this gives them kind of a way to go after that money via the civil system. We have that full screen. I want to pull that back up. Just kind of shows you how this breaks down and the particulars of this law. Basically, it applies to kids under the age of 16. Parents would have to put a portion of earnings from social media posts into a trust if, and here's the key, if the kid's likeness, name, or photograph is in at least 30% or more of the parent's overall content. So more than 30% of your posts contain your kids. Now you're crossing into that threshold. And then after that, it's kind of a sliding scale per video, per photo. Like if a kid is in 100% of the photo, if it's all the kid, they would get 50% of the earnings. But it gets into a lot of numbers there that we're not going to take the time to walk through. It's all in the law. Creators, by the way, can be sued for damages, creators being the parents. So again, that's the enforcement there. I mean, this is basically lawmakers in Illinois trying to get after sort of safety and protections for children as they become sort of more and more a part of the social media industry landscape. Last year, I talked to a state senator who was helping kind of spearhead this law, which has now, again, gone into effect. Here's what he had to say about the rationale behind this.
Most of it is going to be good, well-intentioned fun, but sometimes it's not. And I think that's where we have to have the protections. And certainly we want to make sure that if parents are using this as an income source, and we're talking millions in some cases here, that the child, when they turn 18, at least has something to show for all of their efforts.
Yeah, and to be clear, if parents are sitting at home thinking, oh my gosh, I just posted, photos from a kid's graduation party, we are again talking about influencers. Gadi, you and I know you would have to be posting a ton to get advertisers on your content. And those are the people that we're talking about here, those who really create a job out of it and make a lot of money.
I feel like this is a conversation that a lot of people were having like 10 years ago. It's crazy to think that this is how much time has elapsed before we finally saw a law like this go on the books. But have other states tried to do this? Is this the first in the nation?
This is the first in the nation to succeed. Other states have tried. And what's really interesting about this is actually based off of a law in California that was passed during the silent film era. That law was used as the basis and is still used as the basis to protect child actors in the entertainment industry. So they kind of took that law and then applied it to the social media era and basically said, hey, anybody can be famous. Anybody can make a lot of money off of social media. Let's treat these kids on social media like child actors. That being said, again, Illinois is the first, but California has also tried to pass a social media version of that law. It failed. It's also failed in Washington State, despite some lawmakers' best efforts. So people have tried and failed many a time, but you're right. This conversation has been going on for a long time, and lawmakers in Illinois think it's only going to get more prevalent as these kids who were basically born on social media, they grew up on social media, they're now becoming adults, and some of them are seeing, my family made a lot of money, where's my portion of that? So not going away.
And just to clarify for the kids that may be watching silent film, we're talking about like Charlie Chaplin era, not like silent watching TikTok when you're not supposed to be watching TikTok, right?
We are talking about Charlie Chaplin. Just Google it. You'll get an education. It'll be good.
Awesome, Maggie. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And we've got some more breaking news to get to. This one also about former President Trump. His team has now filed a letter with a judge in New York to postpone his sentencing next week. Now, Trump's team wants to set aside the verdict because of today's Supreme Court ruling. This is the New York criminal case Trump has already been convicted on and is awaiting sentencing. We're going to bring you more information as soon as we get it. And coming up, tennis champ Naomi Osaka won her first match at Wimbledon in 6 years, and the game was a nail-biter. We're going to tell you about that coming up after the break, so stay tuned. Hey, welcome back. Let's take a quick look around the world. A fiery explosion in China. That was where a rocket crashed after an accidental launching during what was supposed to be a static test yesterday. That rocket is being developed by a private space company, and they say the rocket detached from the launch pad during an engine test. It landed about a mile away, and fortunately, no one was hurt. In Ukraine, security officers say they have foiled another Russian plot to try to overthrow the government. The New York Times reports those officials claimed that they discovered a group of conspirators whose plan was apparently supposed to start with a riot. 4 people have been arrested and charged. And Israel's army is ordering a new evacuation of Gaza's second largest city. This could mean another ground assault is in the works. Much of Khan Yunis was destroyed earlier this year, but many Palestinians moved back to escape the offensive in Rafah. The UN Human Rights Office responded to the new evacuation order, saying that it will likely result in mass displacement and family separations while people are already in need of basic necessities. And at Wimbledon, Naomi Osaka, the one-time top women's tennis player in the world, earned her first match win of the famous tournament in 6 years. She defeated Diane Parry in the first round, needing 3 sets to do it, and she survived the final set 6-4. And over in France, a major shift is emerging after the first round of the snap parliamentary election there. Voters have pushed the country's far-right nationalist party to a strong lead. The National Rally won 33% of yesterday's vote, putting the country on course for its first far-right government since World War II. But this election is still far from over. And NBC News international correspondent Keir Simmons has more from Paris.
Well, it is already a political earthquake here in France and has left the country in a political turmoil. A 28-year-old Jordan Bardella has led his party to this 33% victory in this first vote. He is a person who didn't go to university, who grew up impoverished. He is charismatic, he is good-looking, but he is also the leader of the far-right party, along with Marine Le Pen, who's been leading that party for some time, of course. She has led it away from the label fascist, but they are still against immigration, negative on the European Union, positive towards President Putin. If they win, and already it is humiliating the headlines here, say, and across Europe for President Macron. If they win, then Bardella could become the prime minister. You could see others from the far right taking other government roles and welcoming people for the Olympics. And France, of course, is so important in Europe that it would change the politics here. Whoever wins there in the US this year and becomes president in 2025, he may be dealing with a very different Europe.
Absolutely. Keir Simmons, thank you. And before we go, we have the future of everything beach edition, if you will. Already this year, we've reported on a number of shark attacks at the beach. Well, we're going to tell you about some new tech that keeps both humans and sharks safe. And you know the saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure? Well, up in the Pacific Northwest, we met a man who took that phrase to a whole nother level. And he did it in the best way possible. That's coming up after the break, so stay tuned. Look at this.
Comb,
you're beach combing. I found a beach comb. And in tonight's feature of everything, summer is in full swing, and that means a lot of sun, warm temperatures, and packed beaches across the country. But already this year, we've reported on shark attacks at some of those beaches, and that's where a new protection system could come into play. Now, this helps divert sharks before they reach the shoreline, and NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung explains.
They are the apex predators of the oceans. Thousands of sharks now being spotted in American waters each year as they move closer to shore due to warmer waters and increased food supply. Dr. Craig O'Connell has worked with sharks for most of his life. He wants to modernize the way we protect beaches from sharks, keeping swimmers safe, and the sharks, too. He founded the OC's Conservation Foundation in 2013. What got you interested in wanting to research sharks?
It's always been a passion of mine. I saw a shark entangled in a net, and I said, how can we possibly do this to these amazing animals? How can we kill these animals to make the shoreline a little bit more convenient for us to use recreationally?
He spent his career working on this, a shark exclusion barrier that repels sharks almost like a force field. It's a big change from current technology, nets and lines with hooks and chains, used at beaches off Australia and South Africa. What's the problem with nets?
Within a given year, roughly 2,500 sharks are killed, removed from the environment. But not only that, whales, dolphins, sea turtles, rays, everything that's capable of being caught on those hooks or entangled in those nets typically perishes.
O'Connell has been testing his barrier in the Bahamas and Cape Cod with encouraging signs. Sharks turning away. The design is a mix of both low and high tech, playing off of sharks' sensitivities to magnets and electricity.
It's a large visual barrier that extends from shoreline to shoreline, from seafloor to sea surface, and inside that barrier are a series of electromagnets and permanent magnets as a way to selectively repel sharks.
So it repels sharks, not kills them?
Absolutely. It's a non-invasive, eco-friendly technology that does not kill sharks. Oh my God, look at that. That is freaking cool.
O'Connell and his research team, along with student shark camp volunteers, tested the barrier last October in Cape Cod. In this footage, great white sharks turn away. He walked me through the process by setting up a smaller setup here in Montauk, New York.
Right here, this is going to be the base of the structure. This is what's going to be against the sea floor. Up there is what's going to be up at the sea surface.
The pipes are made to compress and stretch to cover both low tide and high tide. And the pipes are white, a visible warning to the sharks. And if they dare to get even a little bit closer,
as it activates, it emits an electric field. So that's our third line of defense.
So it's like a shock? It's an actual electric shock?
Fins will go down, their entire body will shudder, they'll turn away, and it's a deterrent.
O'Connell's team of volunteers and scientists don wetsuits and fins to assemble it in water. The final test for the barrier will be to enclose a full beach. The team travels to Cape Cod in October, high season for shark migration in the North Atlantic. O'Connell will enclose a beach for 2 months to see if it can fend off the big kahuna, great white sharks.
If we could demonstrate it works on great whites, it can withstand these big seas, this thing can be deployed pretty much anywhere.
Brian Chung, NBC News.
Shocking tech there, Brian. Thank you. And finally tonight, I want to take you to this magical beach in the Pacific Northwest I have been dreaming about ever since we visited. It is this special place just beyond some of the most lush old-growth forests I've ever seen. And what washes ashore there, well, it's enough to fill a museum, and that's exactly what one man set out to do.
In the far green reaches of the Pacific Northwest.
Another nice day.
Yeah. John Anderson leads the way to a beachcomber's paradise.
Look at this.
For him, this is the good life.
Imagine this is one of those things that just never gets old.
Long walks on the beach and long walks on the driftwood. Always scanning for anything out of the ordinary.
What do you look for when you're beachcombing?
So you'll see colors, you'll see shapes.
It's like a treasure hunt.
Yeah, it is.
John has been combing the beaches of the Pacific Northwest for almost 50 years.
This is low tide. We can walk all the way out there.
Yeah.
And in all that time, he's never gone home empty-handed.
Well, what do we got on the beach here?
Adding to his massive collection of found treasure.
I have 2 of these at home. One's on top of my big tower.
While always remembering to leave the beach cleaner than when he came.
Look at this.
A comb. You're
a beach combing. I found a beach comb.
Some poor lost soul out there.
Whew. So we got our haul here.
Back from the beach.
Huh.
But exactly how much he's packed out over the years is impossible to appreciate until you visit his home in Forks, Washington, and realize John has taken beachcombing to the extreme.
So this is the buoy yard.
There are towers of buoys.
Black buoys, you've got these different colors.
Boat graveyards, all made into beachcombing installations, inviting people to stop by for a peek at his museum every summer.
So your museum collection is growing every time you go out.
Yep.
And what's inside is a kaleidoscope of our complicated relationship with the sea.
Didn't realize that everything had a story or a person behind it, or somebody used it or lost it or threw it away.
A collection that started with finding elusive Japanese glass buoys that date back as far as a century.
The glass floats are just like holy grail of beachcombing.
And that sparked a lifetime of searching.
This is one of my greatest finds. It's a life raft radio from World War II. If your plane went down, you ejected, well, a life raft with this radio ejected. And you had to swim to it to call for help.
This is from a jet engine?
Boeing told me what it was, but they wouldn't tell me what plane it came from. This is the weirdest thing I ever found.
Oh my gosh.
Snake in the sake. This
This
is habu sake. In Okinawa, they put the habu snake, poisonous snake, in the sake.
And they drink this?
And they drink it to get the mojo from the snake.
But it'll still get you. I mean, I hate snakes. Look at this. Oh.
And then came the years after the catastrophic tsunami in Japan. Debris from a distant disaster would wash up here on Washington shores.
This is the Japanese 2011 tsunami corner.
In 2013, John traveled to Japan to return what he could to owners, documented in Lost and Found.
I'm sure it's going to mean a lot more to somebody than just, a piece of my collection. 2 years after the tsunami, the people just couldn't believe that we would bring it back.
But some of his favorite finds are messages in bottles delivered to him over and over by the ocean.
It is very rare for a single human to find one message in a bottle. You've found dozens of messages in a bottle.
Messages that keep finding their way to the beachcomber.
There's a lot of history and there's a story in everything.
Who celebrates our every connection to the sea.
One of the things that I never gave up in childhood was adventure.
What an enchanting place, right? And get this, right there, in the middle of that spread is a table with pens and paper where you can write your own message in a bottle, and John will personally deliver it to the sea. That's going to do it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you here tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.